Hello. Today for my video, I thought it would be interesting and kind of fun to include my team. Since we're all doing the social distancing thing and we're having a lot of WebEx meetings, I thought it'd be great to introduce my team and include them in this video. So first of all, here's my team, joining live from Iowa, from Dixon, from Nashville, and from all over. I'd like to thank them for joining, and I'm going to go ahead and minimize them and we'll get started. I think this will be a good opportunity for them to hear and to learn as well. So we'll go ahead and get started. First of all, the episode that I chose to watch related to design was an episode about an artist named Olafur Eliasson. Olafur was born in Copenhagen, Denmark, and grew up most of his life there, and then also in many frequent trips to Iceland. Initially, he dabbled in breakdancing and some different artistic expressions, but ultimately he landed in large-scale art. And the thing that I found most intriguing about this artist is that his way of thinking was very similar to the design concepts that we learned in Colorado Springs. And so I'll point out a lot of those as we go. But first of all, I wanted to share a few comments that he said about his art. And I think it really is a good representation of his focus on the customer or the person viewing the art. First of all, he said that the viewer is a co-author with the artist. Then he said that we create reality as we go through space. So as you experience his art, your reality might change. It might become even more real as you touch it, as you feel it, as you taste it. He also, in these last two comments here, he said that his art depends on the spectator and the participant. So he's very customer focused, if you will, in his way of thinking and in expressing his art. I'm going to share 3 of his projects with you. There were 4 or 5 that were represented in the actual video, but I'm going to share 3 of them specifically. And I'll try to point some out of the design thinking and the elements along the way. The first experience that I want to share, the art that he did, was related to this palette that he created. He had a room that was filled with only yellow light, and what you see is a palette that appears to be just black and white, monochrome representations. But what happened is he introduced this white light, and as he pulled on that white light, a different perception came about. And what you actually saw is what reality was, that as the white light was introduced, you could see that it was a palette of many, many different colors. I found this very intriguing and interesting because, once again, it's focused on the individual. It's focused entirely on what they're doing and what they're feeling and what they're perceiving. The next project that he did was one that was based off of a lot of trips that he took to Iceland as a child. His father introduced him to this location, a huge waterfall in Iceland. And as you back up from this waterfall, it still is so huge that even if you go a mile away, you can see it. But what he did is he took this concept and he introduced it in a not so common area. He introduced it in New York City on the Brooklyn Bridge. And I'm going to get my daughter to come in and show this, but it was a great representation of a similar waterfall. And once again, depending on the individual, your experience is going to be very different. If you're standing on the bridge, you might feel the mist. You could for sure hear it. If you're standing a ways over on the edge of the river, you might just hear it, and you may not see it. If you're across the river, you may see it, but you may not hear it or feel it. So once again, a very unique focus on the customer and the participant and the person that's taking place with the artwork. The third work of art that I found interesting was something that he did when he said, I want to turn thinking into doing. So a lot of his ideas and his expressions, he wanted to turn into actually doing things and instilling in people a desire to do things. So what he did, once again, he returned to some areas he'd been to in his childhood, specifically this time to Greenland, where glaciers are sliding, essentially off the land and into the ocean as the climate changes. And he went to a specific fjord there. And what he did is he gathered pieces of ice. He gathered 12 large chunks of ice. And he started in Copenhagen in 2014, but he repeated this project also in Paris and in London in ensuing years. He arranged the chunks of ice like a clock, once again using the clock to represent the time that might be ticking away. And then he invited the public to come and experience this, to touch it, to feel it, to see the ice actually melting. When it's so far away, oftentimes we forget about it, but when it's right there and you're touching and you're feeling it and your senses are part of it, it's very different. I found it interesting. I'll show a few pictures here. First of all, there were actually scenarios where people tasted it. You could lick the ice. Hopefully your tongue didn't get stuck. But you could actually taste the ice, and so you could experience it that way. He also mentioned you could hear the ice melting. And he showed in the video, he showed a very good representation of when these little pockets of air would come to the surface, they'd rise to the surface, and as they would melt and pop, he made the comment that you could hear 5,000-year-old air coming into the atmosphere. I found that really interesting. First of all, that you had such old air trapped inside the ice, and that it was there for 5,000 years. So I found that intriguing. He also brought to the user's experience the feeling of touch. You could feel the ice melting, and you could feel it. All this and all these senses, once again, focusing on the participant, focusing on the customer, if you will. His hope was that behavior change would take place from these emotions and these feelings that people were feeling as they touched these works of art. So to kind of summarize things, what I found interesting is that all of his art was represented the three basic concepts that we discussed when we were in Colorado Springs related to design thinking. That first of all, you have to have inspiration. You have to be inspired. And then once you have that inspiration for change or for developing something new, then what you have to go through the ideation phase where you create, you come up with ideas, you brainstorm, and ultimately create prototypes or models or graphs of what the change might represent. And then ultimately you implement it. So to kind of wrap things up, I love this episode that I got to watch. I think I'll probably watch additional episodes, but I really like this one and this artist with the way that he thought and the way that he designed his artwork was very thoughtful, and it followed the patterns that I had learned, and I found it very beneficial. Thank you very much.